In the last video, we talked about how these four things on the screen right now allow us to kind of characterize or describe a function and what it does. And so what we're going to be doing today is applying this idea to a specific set of code that I wrote to solve a problem for myself. I actually posted a video about this on YouTube a week or 2 weeks ago because I wanted to make it so that when I received an email that was not during work hours, I wanted to automatically have a robot reply and say, hey, you're not going to get a response until we are back within work hours. What I have done is I've actually taken all of that code and I've winnowed it down to this here. This is JavaScript. So this is JavaScript running in Google Apps script. And you can see that I have done this in a way that's very similar to some of the automations that you did. This has a bunch more steps to it, but you can kind of also see that I've taken the sections and sort of put them together. So for example, we have a section where I am getting information about time. I am figuring out, do I need to send a reply or not? And then if I should send a reply, I generate a message and I check email for anything that hasn't been responded to already, and then I send an email if I need to. So this is the overall code. Now what we are going to do is we're going to choose a few of these functions here to analyze using our four-step process so that we can figure out exactly how this overall program works. And so this is the Google Doc that you're going to be using to do this work and analyze these functions. And so I'm going to just show you a little bit about what I'm looking for you to do. So these are the four things. For each function, I'm looking you to identify the task or function name, identify the inputs, identify the outputs, and then explain step by step as best you can to identify what you think each function does. And this is the list of all of the functions that are in my code. And your task with the people in your group is to do this for all of the functions. So let's actually dig in and take a look at a couple of these functions so you know what to do. So we'll start with this code. This is linked both in the Google Doc and also on the assignment that I posted to our course. And so this is that auto reply function. And so the first thing we see happening here is set global variables. So we have to go through and find that function, and this is all actually in order, so you'll be able to find it here. So function set global variables happens here. We can see from looking inside the parentheses that there are no inputs. We can also see, because we don't have a return statement, that this has no outputs either. All it does is it seems to be setting a variable called interval to 5. We're setting the days off, and there's some helpful comments here that help us understand what's going on. We have days when we're sending weekday message. We don't really know what that does right now, perhaps. And finally, working hours. And so this says 5 to 17. So that means that I would be working between 5 a.m. and 5 p.m., for example. So we'll go back to our Google Doc, and we'll say that this is set global variables. The inputs to this function, there are none. There are no outputs either. And all this seems to be doing is just setting some variables that will be needed for the rest of the program. So very straightforward. And that's it. That's what I'm looking for you to do. The next one in the list, var date equals get date. So here's another function call. When I see those two parentheses, I know that we are calling the function. And so this is another function that I need to look for. So let's look for get date. And sure enough, there it is right there. We can see that there's nothing inside the parentheses, so there's no input to this function. But it does have a return statement. So this does return a value. So it has an output, and for right now, because we're just getting started understanding this, we can say it returns a date. So let's put all of that into our Google Doc. GetDate is the name of our function. It has no inputs, It does have an output. It says a date object. And you might notice that date itself has parentheses next to it, which might tell you this is also a function. And you'd be right. So this is a date object. And finally, the algorithm, all it seems to do is it creates a new date using JavaScript. And that's good enough for that one. So the next one is get day specifically. Okay. So get day. It does have an input this time because it has a variable name inside the parentheses, so that's date. And it has a return statement, so this is also returning a value. And so it's returning date, and so date is the input, and it's doing date.getDay. And so you don't need to know this, but the way this works is a date object in JavaScript has a bunch of things built into it that lets you find out information about the date you've created. And one of those things is to get the day, and day is a number, it's 0 through 6. 0 is Sunday, 1 is Monday, 2 is Tuesday, and so on, all the way up to 6, which is Saturday. And so that's how that works. So let's put it in our Google Doc. Get day. The inputs are a date, and you might say date object, and the output is going to be the day of the week. Ooh, that did it automatically. And that's going to be a number 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. And the algorithm for this one is pretty straightforward. This is just saying returns the day number. Let's just say a built-in function. All right, let's do one more. So we're going to look at this function a little bit farther down called is outside work hours. So it has an input, which is the current hour, so current hour of the day. And I've included a couple variables to help figure out if we're outside work hours. So I make this variable is before start time, and then we have this expression on the right-hand side. So if current hour is less than working hours 0. Let's talk about working hours. Working hours is this list right here. Working hours 0 is the first element of this array. So that's 5. Working hours bracket 1 would be the 17. So putting that number inside the bracket lets us access the numbers from the list. This is saying if the current hour is less than the first element of that array, then that means is before start time. So let's say current hour is 3 and working hours was 5. If it's 3 a.m. and working hours start at 5 a.m., this right here is a true statement. So it would be true that we're before the start time. Is after end time works the same way, but this time if it's greater than or equal to the second element of working hours. So if the current hour is 3 a.m., we are not after 5 p.m. But if the current time is 8 p.m., which would be 20 o'clock, 20 as a value, that is definitely greater than 17, and so it would be after work hours. So this is a true or false statement saying, are we after the end of work hour? Is before start time, so that's true or false. Is after end time, that's true or false. And then we have this in the middle, which is the OR operator. So if we're before start time or it's after end time, then we return a value. So this gets us to whether this returns a value, and it does. But before you think, oh, maybe this returns two different values, I want you to notice that either this function will return true or it will return false. It can't return both. So this is really only returning one value. Let's fill out the Google Doc. So we have the function name is outside work hours. So the inputs is just current hour. The outputs is going to be a true or false, depending on whether or not the current hour is outside work hours. Okay, and the algorithm, I'm going to take the code and just turn it into some language. So find if the current time is before start time, or if it is after end time. If either one is true, return true, otherwise return false. Okay, and that's it. And that's what I'm looking for you to do for all of the remaining functions in this code. Work together, ask me for help if you need it, but I'm hoping this will help you get in the habit of looking at a function and understanding what it does, what are the inputs, what are the outputs, because that's going to really be helpful as we move forward in doing this for other code that you write yourself.